Hello, this is my second vlog on skills and capacities in speed and agility. A skill is the athlete's ability to control movement efficiently, whereas a capacity issue is the ability of the body to fulfill a movement task, often resulting in a restriction to perform this movement task. Both can certainly interact with each other. Video 1 will be aiming to improve an athlete's top-end speed mechanics from a skill perspective. Video 2 will be looking at an athlete's running mechanics during acceleration phase of sprinting and translating this back to his sport from a capacity perspective. And the final video will be myself performing a change of direction drill, looking at both skill and capacity issues and how they interact with each other. This first video is my athlete performing a 30-meter fly sprint, where all I've instructed him to do is build up for 20 meters, and once he hits the 20-meter cone to let himself go at top speed for 30 meters. If we move the clip slowly through the different phases of maximal sprinting, we can see several technical errors occurring. When we pause the clip at pre-stance, things don't look too bad apart from the knee catch-up of the swing leg being too far behind the lead leg. This is usually due to a long heel recovery out the back of that toe off. However, we will have a look at this shortly. The gap between both knees is far too large. Foot placement looks relatively good with ground contact just before centre of mass. At mid-stance, his ground reaction forces are directed vertically and his knee peak is closed. However, the knee of his swing leg now needs to be past his stance knee, resulting in higher knee drive sooner in the piece, with his swing shin angle being horizontal to the floor. At late stance, we ideally want to see that knee drive a bit higher, and then moving into swing phase we can see that long heel recovery that flicks the heel and kicks it out at the back. This long heel return will delay each phase of the technique and therefore result in striking way out in front of centre of mass, creating negative braking forces throughout the process. I got the athlete to perform some testing procedures in order to understand whether any of these technical issues were due to underlying capacity issues. We performed a lying Thomas test to check for hip flexor range of motion, which may result in that poor knee drive range. His lying leg didn't come off the floor either side when pulling his knee to his chest, suggesting his hip flexors are not a limiting factor. We then did some hurdle mobility drills to understand more about his hips, aiming to get his swing shin horizontal to the floor when lifting over the hurdle. To test posterior chain range of motion, we performed a straight leg raise where I was holding ASIS and PSIS and stopping his leg when I felt his pelvis tilt. The athlete's 90-degree range here is more than adequate. For the athlete's hip stability, we performed a stalk test where I was looking for movement between PSIS and L5, a single leg altitude landing to understand his ability to absorb force with strong ankle, knee and hip alignment, as well as a basic hop and stick. We did some basic pogos to understand more about the athlete's ability to produce stiffness and reactivity of his foot, ankle and calf complex. These tests suggested that the athlete doesn't have too many concerning capacity issues, and therefore I took a constraints-based approach to address his technical issues from a skills perspective. I used a wickets drill as a great tool for faster impulse due to faster swing leg recovery. This will reduce ground contact time and increase timing and synchronicity. Immediately you can see what an impact a constraints-based approach such as wickets can do. At pre-stance, the athlete's knee catch-up is a bit closer to the stance leg, resulting in a smaller gap between both knees. Foot placement and ground contact just before centre of mass is looking good. At mid-stance, that knee peak is closed with higher knee drive and shin angle more horizontal to the ground. At late stance, his front arm is more closed, back arm opens at rear and knee drive is more prevalent. At toe off, we can see that the wickets result in the athlete not being able to kick out at the back. His heel return is a bit more direct towards his hips and ground contact time is significantly reduced as he has to prepare quickly for the next hurdle to be cleared. The whole movement is more cyclical in nature and his foot strike appears to be a lot more under his centre of mass, resulting in fewer negative braking forces. Although not perfect, a drill such as wickets highlights how quickly and efficiently technical errors from a skill perspective can be smoothed out. The second video is of an athlete who is a fast bowler in cricket. I will be analysing his run-up technique from a capacity perspective. From front view we can see the athlete has a crossover gait where his feet on ground contact crosses over the midline of his body, like running on a tightrope. I wanted to see whether this issue transferred across to his regular sprint technique, so after a solid warm-up I got him to perform some 30-meter sprints where I analysed his acceleration movement mechanics. Considering this novice athlete has not done any sprinting technical work, his position, angle and posture in his opening strides of his side-on view are not too bad. His knee drive creating greater force to overcome inertia is fairly good, as well as his ball of foot contact to create positive shin angles. However, powerful hip extension and lower heel recovery is required. On the other hand, from front on, we can again see this crossover gait occurring, where his feet at point of ground contact are internally rotated and his contact point is close to the midline of his body. Immediately my attention goes to the athlete's hip stability and mobility. I conducted some tests where I addressed his hip external and internal rotation. Ideally, we roughly want 45 degrees of range both internally and externally. In this instance, his adductors are tight, short and weak, in particular on his right side as shown in this image. His abductors are fairly lengthened and weak. I then performed an adductor test where I instructed the athlete to push away into my hand and then in towards my hands. Pushing away into my hand should correctly indicate stronger abductors, however in this case it was the opposite. His Thomas test looked reasonable where his hips remained fairly flat and shin was vertical to the floor, suggesting decent range through his hip flexors. Post-examination, I programmed the athlete some self-myofascial release involving foam rolling of the calf complex and hip musculature, in particular TFL. I showed him some banded hip mobility drills as well as a hip opener series to perform pre-exercise. Furthermore, strengthening is required where I coached some general and specific exercises that also replicated acceleration, positioning and angles on field. The step up with hip lock as well as heavy sled push is a great way to apply force into the ground as well as strengthening the attractors of sprinting. We contrasted this strength work with some wall marches to again reiterate positioning. I am then beginning to coach the athlete specific running mechanics drills. Here we have a high knee march and high knee skip, or A march and A skip, trying to emphasize certain elements of running posture and angles, teach rhythm and relaxation, timing and coordination, which is crucial for sprinting. These drills help with production and absorption of force whilst encouraging stiffness and reactivity. The penguin walks are attempting to keep the foot, knee and hip over the top of each other whilst preventing any frontal plane hip movement. I am looking for adequate spacing between the foot and knee. I then took a constraints-based approach where the athlete had to focus on landing each foot either side of the white line during his sprint. I am hoping that over time, strengthening, realignment and repetition will help the capacity issue. The final video is myself performing a pro shuttle drill, which can also be used as a method to assess a player's quickness and ability to change direction. Main technical skill and capacity KPIs involved with change of direction include learning the pattern before adding a reactive element to agility, having a low centre of mass for stability and force production, striking within the drop zone under the hips, having a neutral head position, simultaneous hip and shoulder movement whilst having an effective ability to decelerate and absorb force. If we analyse the frontal view of my pro shuttle, we can see that I generally hold a high position, meaning I have to quickly drop my centre of mass when changing direction, losing any ability to maintain a neutral head position, in turn making my deceleration process very inefficient. As I come out of the turn, we can see limited knee drive and minimal powerful hip extension for optimal horizontal force production, as well as my foot strike being in front of my centre of mass and not under my hips, producing negative braking forces. The side-on view highlights significant hip drop and hip shift as I am trying to produce force and accelerate, potentially showing weakness and instability around my hip musculature. Change of direction requires the ability to rapidly absorb large eccentric forces and then quickly produce force. Firstly, using the MyJump2 app, I measured my reactive strength index to evaluate whether I'm strong enough to have the capacity to cope with higher eccentric forces. Reactive strength is related to acceleration speed, change of direction speed and agility. I performed a drop jump using the app where my jump height was divided by my ground contact time, giving me my RSI. This test determines how athletes cope with the stress imposed on their body from plyometric exercises. As you can see, my RSI measured at 1.88, showing on the chart I hold a fairly moderate reactive strength capacity and is therefore an area for performance enhancement. To improve my capacity to quickly absorb force and isolate my poor hip stability, I performed a single leg altitude landing, a banded lateral shuffle, and a single leg squat to box. Here it is clear to see the instability around my hips and poor ankle knee hip alignment. To enhance my ability to absorb force and then rapidly produce force, I performed depth jumps where the aim was to spend slightly longer on the ground, efficiently absorbing force with a huge focus to get as much height from the jump as possible. I also performed drop jumps to a box where the main objective was to decrease ground contact time, enhancing my reactive ability, elasticity and stiffness with a shock method at the end of the plyometric spectrum. Further to this, I performed rudimental jumps to again focus on my reactivity and stiffness where simultaneous flexion and extension occurs, leading to increased synchronization and amortization. As mentioned, force absorption and deceleration is crucial for change of direction. I performed deceleration drills in both a closed and reactive environment where I was randomly told to stop as quickly as possible at top speed. From a skill perspective, I tried to replicate the turning component as best as possible, performing a lateral bound and stick, lateral bound and return, and a resisted crossover, where being able to switch limbs in the frontal plane, driving and producing force from the outside edge of the foot is crucial. I then tried to train these key attractor states from different starting positions, full starts, kneeling starts and side starts, aiming to produce horizontal force and positive shin angles from these low positions. Nebular run drill provides resistance and overspeed working towards stride frequency and rapid turnover. I then contrasted this with in-out turn. I then took a constraints-based approach from a skill perspective where I placed hurdles at the turns of the Pro Shuttle drill where the aim was to stay more compact within my turns. Thank you for watching. I hope this has given a good picture of how to address skill and capacity issues in speed and agility, as well as appreciating how they can both interact with each other when performing a desired movement task.